I felt the crisp mountain air bite at my cheeks as I stepped out of the lodge, but the cold was nothing compared to the heat building inside me. Declan was already there, adjusting his gear with practiced ease, his breath forming small clouds in the winter air. When he looked up and caught my eye, something passed between us, electric, undeniable. "Ready for your lesson?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate steaming in my hands. I nodded, though we both knew this wasn't really about skiing anymore. The tension had been building all week, in stolen glances across the lodge, in the way his hands lingered when he adjusted my stance, in the conversations that stretched long into the evening by the fireplace. Now, as snowflakes began to fall around us, I could feel something shifting, something that would change everything about this mountain retreat. Before we dive into what happened next, please do me a quick favor. Like this video and hit subscribe. It's free, takes only a second, and helps more than you think. Plus, you'll never miss the next story. Now let's get started. The mountains stretched endlessly before us, pristine white slopes catching the late afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. I'd been here 3 days already, and each lesson with Declan had grown more intense, though not in the way I'd expected when I first signed up for ski instruction. What started as clumsy attempts to stay upright had evolved into something entirely different, a dance of proximity and tension that had nothing to do with technique. "Your stance is getting better," he said, gliding up beside me with effortless grace. "But you're still too tense." His gloved hands found my shoulders, adjusting my posture with a touch that sent warmth racing through me despite the freezing air. "Relax into it. Trust the mountain. Trust." The word hung between us, loaded with meaning that went far beyond skiing. I'd come here to escape from work stress, from a relationship that had ended badly, from the suffocating routine of city life. The last thing I'd expected was to find myself drawn to my instructor, this quiet man with storm gray eyes who seemed to understand the mountain like it was part of his soul. Like this? I shifted my weight, hyper-aware of his hands still resting on my shoulders, the heat of his touch seeping through my jacket. "Better." His voice was lower now, almost intimate. "Feel how the snow responds to you. Don't fight it." We made several more runs as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the snow like fire. Each time, his guidance became more personal, his touches more lingering. When I stumbled near the bottom of a particularly challenging slope, he caught me easily, our bodies pressed together for a moment that stretched longer than necessary. "I think that's enough for today," he said, though his arms didn't immediately release me. The lifts closed soon anyway, but as we stood there, the mountain growing quiet around us save for the whisper of wind through the trees, I realized I wasn't ready for the lesson to end. The lodge would be crowded with other guests, filled with chatter and the clatter of après-ski activities. What I wanted was more of this, the silence, the closeness, the electric current that seemed to flow between us whenever we were alone. "Actually," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "I was hoping you could show me something else." His eyebrows rose slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What did you have in mind?" "Your cabin." The words tumbled out before I could second-guess them. "You mentioned it yesterday, how it's tucked away in the trees. I'd love to see it." For a moment he didn't respond, just studied my face with those penetrating gray eyes. Then slowly he nodded. "It's not much, but it's quiet. Private. Private." The word sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. We skied down a narrow trail I hadn't noticed before, one that wound through dense evergreens heavy with snow. The path was clearly less traveled, and I found myself following the steady rhythm of Declan's movements ahead of me, mesmerized by the fluid way he navigated the terrain. As we went deeper into the forest, the sounds of the main slopes faded entirely, leaving only the soft whisper of our skis on snow and the occasional crack of a branch settling under its white burden. The cabin appeared almost suddenly, a small, wooden structure that seemed to grow out of the mountainside itself. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm light glowed through frost-etched windows. It was like something from a fairy tale, isolated and inviting. "Home sweet home," Declan said, pulling off his skis with practiced efficiency. "It's not the Ritz, but it suits me." I followed his lead, my fingers fumbling slightly with the bindings as anticipation made them clumsy. When he offered his hand to help me up the snow-covered steps, I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm even through our gloves. Inside, the cabin was everything I'd imagined and more. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing cheerfully behind a metal screen. The space was small but perfectly arranged, a kitchen area with rough-hewn cabinets, a sitting area with worn leather furniture that looked incredibly comfortable, and in the corner, partially visible through an open doorway, the edge of a large bed covered in thick quilts. "Let me take your jacket," Declan said, moving behind me to help with the zipper. His fingers brushed the back of my neck as he lifted the collar away, and I felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. "It's beautiful," I said, though I was suddenly very aware of how alone we were, how the silence seemed to wrap around us like a cocoon. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years. He hung our jackets on pegs by the door, then moved to the fireplace to add another log. "Bought it from an old-timer who was ready to move closer to town. Best decision I ever made." I wandered, closer to the fire, holding my hands out to the warmth. The heat felt incredible after hours on the mountain, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. "I can see why. It feels like you're completely separate from the world." "That's the idea." He straightened from the fireplace, and when I turned, I found him watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea, something stronger?" "Something stronger sounds perfect." He moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight as he poured 2 generous measures into heavy glasses. When he handed me one, our fingers touched briefly, a small contact that nonetheless sent heat spiraling through me. "To mountain lessons," he said, raising his glass. "To unexpected discoveries," I countered, meeting his toast. The whiskey burned pleasantly as it went down, adding to the warmth already building inside me. We stood close to the fire, the silence between us comfortable but charged with possibility. I could feel him watching me, could sense the shift in the air around us. "Allison," he said finally, my name a low rumble in his chest. "I should probably tell you something." "What's that?" "This isn't something I normally do. Bringing students here, I mean." I set my glass down on the mantel, turning to face him fully. "Then why did you bring me?" For a moment he seemed to struggle with the answer. Then he stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could smell the faint scent of pine and cold air that clung to his skin. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the first day," he said simply. "Because every time I touch you to adjust your form, it takes everything I have not to pull you closer. Because you're driving me absolutely crazy, and I thought maybe you felt it too." My heart hammered against my ribs as he spoke, each word confirming what I'd been hoping, what I'd been feeling but hadn't dared to voice. "I do feel it," I whispered. "I've felt it all week." That was all the permission he needed. In one smooth movement, he closed the distance between us, his hands coming up to frame my face as his mouth found mine. The kiss was everything I'd imagined, and more, hungry, desperate, filled with days of suppressed longing. I melted into him, my hands fisting in his sweater as I pulled him closer. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Are you sure about this?" Instead of answering with words, I kissed him again, pouring all my certainty into the contact. His response was immediate and intense, his arms wrapping around my waist to lift me slightly, pressing me back against the stone wall beside the fireplace. The stones were warm from the fire, and I could feel the heat seeping through my thermal shirt as his mouth traced a path along my jaw, down the column of my throat. "God, you taste like snow and sunshine," he murmured against my skin, his breath hot and sending shivers racing through me. My fingers found the hem of his sweater, slipping underneath to explore the firm planes of his chest. His skin was fever-warm beneath my palms, muscles flexing as he responded to my touch. When I dragged my nails lightly across his abs, he groaned low in his throat, the sound vibrating against my neck where his lips had found the sensitive spot, just below my ear. "Bedroom?" he asked, though his hands were already working at the buttons of my thermal shirt, his knuckles brushing against my skin with each movement. "Yes," I breathed, though I made no move to step away from the wall, too, lost in the sensation of his mouth on my throat, his hands mapping the curves of my body through the fabric. Somehow we made it across the small space, leaving a trail of discarded clothing behind us. My thermal shirt, his sweater, boots kicked off carelessly. By the time we reached the bed, I was down to my base layers, the thin fabric doing nothing to hide my response to his touch. The bed was as inviting as it had looked from the main room, a thick mattress covered in soft quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and something uniquely him. He lowered me onto it with reverent care, following me down so that his weight pressed me into the soft bedding. "You're incredible," he whispered, his hands tracing patterns on my skin that made me arch beneath him. "I've been imagining this all week. Show me," I challenged, surprising myself with my boldness. "Show me what you've been imagining." His eyes darkened at my words, and suddenly his touch became more purposeful, more intense. He mapped every inch of exposed skin with his lips and hands, finding spots that made me gasp and shiver, building heat between us that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the next room. When he finally moved to remove the last barriers between us, his touch was gentle but sure. The whisper of fabric against skin, the slide of his hands as he helped me out of the last pieces of clothing, the way he paused to just look at me in the firelight streaming through the doorway. It all felt like a dream, like something too perfect to be real. "Beautiful," he said simply, and the reverence in his voice made my chest tight with emotion. I reached for him then, my fingers working at his remaining clothes with increasing urgency. I wanted to feel all of him, wanted nothing between us but skin and breath and the electricity that sparked wherever we touched. When he finally settled over me, the weight of him solid and warm, I felt something inside me settle too, like a puzzle piece finding its perfect place. We moved together slowly at first, learning each other's rhythms, discovering what made the other sigh or arch or grip tighter. The fire cast dancing shadows across the walls, and outside, snow continued to fall, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy that felt removed from the rest of the world. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word built the intensity between us. I lost track of time, lost in the sensation of his mouth on my skin, the way his hands seemed to know exactly where to touch to make me tremble. When he shifted position, settling more fully against me, I felt a completeness I hadn't known I was missing. "Is this what you wanted?" he murmured against my ear, his voice rough with need. "More," I whispered back, my nails digging into his shoulders. "I want more." And he gave me more, everything I asked for, and things I didn't know to ask for. We moved together with increasing urgency, the careful exploration giving way to something more primal, more necessary. The sound of our breathing filled the small room, punctuated by whispered encouragement and the soft sounds of pleasure that I couldn't hold back. When the tension finally reached its peak, when I felt myself spiraling toward something bright and overwhelming, I cried out his name. The sound seemed to shatter something inside him, and with a groan that came from deep in his chest, he followed me over the edge, his body shuddering against mine as we rode out the waves together. Afterward, we lay entwined beneath the quilts, skin damp and hearts still racing. I could feel his pulse against my cheek where my head rested on his chest, could hear the crackling of the fire in the next room mixing with the soft sound of falling snow against the windows. That was... I started, then trailed off, not sure how to put the experience into words. "Yeah," he agreed, his fingers combing gently through my hair. "It was." I tilted my head to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. "Do you think this changes things? The lessons, I mean." He was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling in my hair. "Do you want it to?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. I'd come to the mountains to escape, to find some clarity about what I wanted from life. I hadn't expected to find it in the arms of a ski instructor who lived in a cabin in the woods. "I don't know," I admitted. "I leave on Sunday." "That's 2 more days." 2 more days, I repeated, though something in my chest tightened at the thought of leaving this place, leaving him. "Then let's not waste them thinking about Sunday," he said, rolling to face me fully. "Let's just see what happens." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he kissed me again, softer this time, but no less intense. As his hands began their slow exploration again, as the heat started to build between us once more, I pushed thoughts of departure from my mind. He was right. We had this moment, and that would have to be enough. The night passed in a haze of warmth and discovery. We talked between the moments of passion, sharing stories and dreams in the intimate darkness. I learned that he'd been a corporate lawyer before moving to the mountains, that he'd walked away from a life that looked perfect on paper but felt empty inside. He learned about my own struggles with expectations and the pressure to follow a path that didn't feel like mine. "What would you do if you could do anything?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder as we lay facing each other, in the pre-dawn darkness. "Travel, maybe." "Right." I paused, surprised by my own honesty. "I used to write stories when I was younger. Always dreamed of seeing the world, writing about the places I'd been." "What's stopping you?" The simple question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a good answer. Fear, maybe. Convention. The safe path that everyone expected me to follow. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe that's your answer then. Maybe not knowing is enough to start with." When I woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows, and Declan was already up, moving quietly around the small kitchen. The smell of coffee and something sweet filled the air, and I could hear him humming softly to himself. For a moment, I just lay there, watching him work, struck by how natural it felt to wake up in his space, how right it seemed. "Morning," he said when he noticed I was awake, bringing me a steaming mug. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. The first sip was perfect, strong and hot with just a hint of sweetness. "Good." He sat on the edge of the bed, his own mug in hand. "I made pancakes, figured you'd need fuel for the slopes." The mention of skiing brought reality rushing back. Today was Saturday. Tomorrow, I'd be flying back to my life in the city, back to the job that drained me and the routine that felt more like a prison with each passing day. Declan, I started, not sure what I wanted to say. I know. He reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face. Let's just take it one run at a time, okay? We ate breakfast mostly in comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. When it was time to get ready for the slopes, I found myself moving slowly, reluctant to leave the warm cocoon of the cabin. Hey, Declan said, catching my hand as I reached for my jacket. Whatever happens, last night was incredible. Don't let thinking about tomorrow take away from that. I nodded, squeezing his fingers. You're right, one run at a time. The morning on the mountain was different from any of our previous lessons. There was an ease between us now, an intimacy that went beyond the physical. When he adjusted my stance, his touch lingered. When we stopped for breaks, we stood closer than strictly necessary. Other skiers probably thought we were a couple who'd been together for years, not instructor and student who'd crossed a line, just hours before. You're getting good at this, he said as we prepared for another run. Really good. You might not need lessons much longer. The words hit harder than they should have, carrying implications I wasn't ready to face. Maybe I'll always need lessons, I said lightly, but I could see in his eyes that he understood what I really meant. We skied until the late afternoon, when the sun began to sink toward the peaks and the temperature started to drop. As we made our way back to the lodge, I found myself memorizing everything. The way the light caught the snow, the sound of our skis on the groomed runs, the feel of the mountain air in my lungs. Dinner? Declan asked as we reached the bottom of the last run. There's a place in town that makes amazing elk steaks. I almost said yes automatically, then remembered. I can't. I have plans with some of the other guests from the lodge. A farewell dinner thing. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe. But he nodded. Of course. Maybe after? Maybe after, I agreed, though we both knew it wasn't really a question. The farewell dinner was torture. I sat at a table full of people I'd barely spoken to all week, making polite conversation about where we were all from and what we did for work, all while my mind kept drifting to the cabin in the woods and the man who'd shown me what it felt like to be truly alive. When it was finally over, I practically ran back to my room to change. I'd packed for a ski vacation, not for whatever this was, but I found a dress that would work. Nothing fancy, just a simple black number that hugged my curves and made me feel confident. The walk to Declan's cabin felt different in the dark. Snow crunched under my boots and my breath formed clouds in the frigid air, but I barely noticed the cold. All I could think about was seeing him again, about what these last hours together might hold. He was waiting for me when I arrived, silhouetted in the warm light spilling from the doorway. Without a word, he pulled me inside and into his arms, his mouth finding mine with desperate intensity. I couldn't stop thinking about you, he murmured, against my lips. All day, all I could think about was getting you back here. I'm here now, I whispered back, my hands already working at the buttons of his shirt. This time there was no slow build-up, no careful exploration. We came together with the urgency of people who knew their time was limited, who wanted to pack a lifetime of sensation into a few precious hours. He lifted me onto the kitchen counter, his hands bunching my dress up around my hips as he settled between my legs. Tell me what you want, he said, his voice rough with need. You, I gasped, my head falling back as his mouth found the sensitive spot at the base of my throat. All of you. He carried me to the bedroom and we fell onto the rumpled quilts in a tangle of limbs and desperate kisses. Every touch felt electric, charged with the knowledge that this might be our last night together. When he finally joined with me, when I felt that perfect completeness again, I had to bite my lip to keep from saying the words that pressed against my throat. We moved together with a passion that bordered on desperate, chasing something we both knew we couldn't quite catch. When the peak finally claimed us, when we shattered together in the firelight, I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, tears of pleasure, of loss, of something too complex to name. Stay, he whispered as we lay wrapped in each other's arms afterward. Not just tonight, stay. The words hung in the air between us, a question and a plea and a possibility all at once. I felt something inside my chest crack open, felt all the careful barriers I'd built around my heart crumble. I can't, I whispered, though every part of me screamed that I could, that I should, that this was exactly what I'd been looking for. Without knowing it, why not? Because I struggled to find words that made sense. Because I have a life, a job, responsibilities. Do you love that life? The simple question cut through all my excuses, all my rationalizations. Did I love my life? The long hours at a job that felt meaningless, the apartment I could barely afford, the friends who were more like acquaintances, the endless cycle of work and sleep and obligation? No, I admitted. But I can't just walk away from everything. Why not? He asked again. What's the worst that could happen? I laughed, a sound caught between humor and tears. I could end up broke, unemployed, stranded in the mountains with a man I barely know. You could, he agreed. Or you could end up happy. I lay there in the darkness, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my cheek, and for a moment, I let myself imagine it. Waking up in this bed every morning, learning to love the mountain the way he did, maybe writing those stories I'd always dreamed about. It was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. I need to think, I said finally. Of course, his arms tightened around me, but think fast. Your flight's tomorrow night. We didn't sleep much that last night. We talked and made love and held each other as the hours slipped away too quickly. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, I knew I had to go back to the lodge, had to pack and check out and pretend that everything was normal. This doesn't have to be goodbye, Declan said as I got dressed. It could be, see you later. I kissed him one last time, pouring everything I couldn't say into the contact. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. The lodge felt like a different world after the intimacy of the cabin. I packed mechanically, my movements automatic as my mind wrestled with impossible choices. Part of me kept waiting for clarity to strike, for some sign that would tell me definitively what to do. But as I stood in the lobby with my suitcase, waiting for the shuttle to the airport, I realized that maybe clarity wasn't the point. Maybe life was about taking leaps even when you couldn't see where you'd land. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Declan's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. Through the lodge's big windows, I could see the mountain rising majestically. Against the blue sky, I could see the slopes where he'd taught me so much more than just skiing. One run at a time, he'd said. Maybe that was all any of us could do. Take it one decision at a time, one moment at a time, one leap of faith at a time. Some chances only come once in a lifetime, disguised as a ski lesson on a snowy mountain. If you found yourself in my boots, standing at that crossroads between safe and unknown, what would you choose? Would you take the leap or stick to the planned path? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear about the moments that changed your direction. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Thanks for following this journey with me.